And would it have been worthwhile after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all. I shall tell you all. If one settling a pillow by her head should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not it at all. Sometimes when someone becomes annoyed over something real, they become emotionally overwrought and perceive things that aren't actually there as well. Something someone did or said or didn't do correctly. A legitimate annoyance that can be turned from a molehill into a mountain that requires a team of Sherpas to scale. It's one of the less attractive aspects of human nature. Sometimes the misunderstanding sort of gnaws at the person who's upset, and they begin attaching more and more to the original upset until it's no longer recognizable. Sometimes they fool themselves into believing they've been victimized when nothing of the sort has actually happened. Sometimes they blow up in rage at a person they see as a villain, taking perfectly valid grievances and turning them into something sinister or malicious, which might leave the person they accuse utterly bewildered. Sometimes the person they confront admits to the very real original grievances and requests further discussion or substantiation of the emotional value that has been projected onto them. And sometimes that only further upsets the person who's feeling hard done by. Sometimes they attack and vilify the other person publicly, only to discover later the entire mess was, well, a silly misunderstanding. And sometimes they do a lot of damage in their rage. Sometimes when a person is upset, more than wanting to have their legitimate complaint actually addressed, they want to gather people around them and vent until the room resonates with resentment. Villagers, armed with pitchforks and torches, marching en masse upon the mad scientist's castle. In compassion for their obvious upset, the crowd sharpens their knives, feeling abused themselves for an upset imposed upon their beloved comrade. Sometimes it's a singular event, and sometimes it's an habitual issue. And sometimes in respect for the legitimate original grievance being essentially correct, though incredibly conflated, the evil and villainous beast within the castle refuses to return the attack. And sometimes the victim and the villagers, armed with farm tools and vitriol, mistake the monster's silence for either weakness or admission of being the hideous beast. They forget that there might be screen caps of independently verifiable conversations, which would, if released, expose them in a context of irrational rioting cultists, which itself would actually be untrue. The monster would find himself having to make a choice of defending himself by making people who were acting human into horrible beasts themselves. And sometimes they just don't realize how far it's safe to push the monster before he does exactly that. I've been silent in the hopes that those who initiated the tale of the monster would own responsibility for themselves and defuse the villagers. Personally acknowledge that they caused the monster injury with their hasty behavior, and having burned the castle down before figuring out that an accusation made against the monster was actually completely untrue. Something like, oops, sorry I burned your castle down and lynched you over this silly misunderstanding, might be appropriate. What you're doing is reckless and destructive, and also extremely unnecessary. You have now conjured a second monster, and the first monster has watched as the villagers have burned down the castle next door as well, and also for no reason other than the emotional conflation of a non-issue into a riot. First monster might see it as a duty, in spite of consequences, set the villagers up a glass in which they would be forced to view themselves in the role of monsters themselves through the eyes of others. Gather a measure of reason about you and act like rational people. Cease the sharpening of knives at imaginary injuries caused by monsters you have conjured in your own midst.
Understand the procedure now? Just stop a few of their machines and radios and telephones and lawnmowers. Throw them into darkness for a few hours and then sit back and watch the pattern.
And this pattern is always the same?
With few variations. They pick the most dangerous enemy they can find, and it's themselves. All we need to do is sit back and watch.
Then I take it this place, this Maple Street, is not unique.
By no means. Their world is full of Maple Streets. And we'll go from one to the other and let them destroy themselves. One to the other. One to the other. One to the other.
The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of men. For the record, prejudices can kill, and suspicion can destroy. And a thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own, for the children and the children yet unborn. And the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined to the Twilight Zone.